We're going live in just a few seconds. Hello, everyone. Please let me know if you can't hear or see. Just type a message on the chat on the right hand. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to get more people to join, and then we can get started. Okay. I think we're okay. Great. Thank you so much. We can just get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Lara, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Green Story. Thanks again for joining our webinar series. This one is on consumer sentiment and green legislation, Europe versus US. But before we get started, and I'll introduce you to our guest for today, I'd like to say a few words about Green Story. Green Story is a sustainability platform that enables brands to accurately measure and communicate the positive impact of their products and make them carbon neutral. What we do, by combining life cycle assessment methodology with interactive data and impact visuals and a carbon offset platform, we reach the customer experience with the brand's green story throughout the customer life cycle, enhancing transparency, increasing engagement and loyalty, and driving revenue. We partner with hundreds of sustainable fashion players like Pangaya, Hanesbrands, ThredUp, and have a global team of experts working to empower 1 billion consumers to know their impact and make choices that are better for the planet and the generations to come. So now, without any further ado, I'm super excited to introduce you to our guest. Today we're hosting Rochelle. Here you go. Rochelle, who's the Head of Research and Insights at MaCher, a certified B Corp that uses data and academic research to create thoughtful, meaningful, and sustainable solutions that get brands noticed. And Jason. Jason is the founder of Composed, a digital agency focused on addressing business goals for its clients through sustainable solutions. I'm just going to give you guys the stage if you'd like to say a few words about yourselves. Rochelle, do you want to get started?
Sure, thanks, Lara, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited about this opportunity. So my background is in research, in consumer research, market research, economic research, and policy research as well across a number of different industries. So for my sins, I started many years ago, standing on street corners with a clipboard asking people questions, because that's how things did work in those days. And I know that questionnaires and understanding consumer behavior has moved on in the questionnaire world since then. But getting those insights and understanding behavior is something that is still very important and still something that's absolutely necessary in our world. So as Lara said, MaCher works making branded products for companies. And we know that the industry that we're in can be a bit dirty and not very productive at times. There's a lot of, to be honest, a lot of junk that's made that people don't care about, that just gets thrown away, and it just creates trash. And that's just not something that we want to be part of, and we want to make thoughtful and useful products. So do a lot of bringing in the academic theory and academic research into what we do, how we think, how we work, and then measuring and always sort of monitoring the impact of how our products are doing in the marketplace as well, using sustainable materials along the way. So that's what we're trying to do, and really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Jason.
Great. Hey, thanks everybody. My name is Jason Parkin. I'm the founder and president of Composed. As Lara mentioned, we're a digital creative strategy and services agency. We're also certified B Corp, along with our partners and friends at MaCher, and a member of 1% for the Planet. We've been around for just over 11 years now, and my background is really on the design side, which is an area that I've been in for, I guess, about 25 years now, not to date myself too much. And that's been everywhere from the brand side to the agency side to publishing, where I was over at Condé Nast for a while, to doing a personal video sharing startup back in late 2005, when we were one of the few ones not named YouTube at the time. And as Lara mentioned as well, we do really look at addressing a lot of our clients' business goals, either their own sustainability efforts or looking at how we can help them along that journey, and really looking at whether it's their supply chain, really focusing on the things that they're doing right. We have a great director of sustainability on our team who partners with us, who has also over 20 years experience in the business. So we really look to utilize his knowledge as well as all of the marketing and digital expertise that we have on our team. A few years ago, we started an insights team, which we were, grateful and lucky enough to have Rochelle and the team at MaCher partner with us on, which we're going to talk about today. And it's something that we just continue to look to lead in, what that narrative is what consumers are looking for in brands, what they're demanding, and what their expectations are. And I think what we've seen over the past 3 years has just been a continual trend upwards. I've been pretty fond of saying that in 2018, I started saying in 5 years, brands that aren't sustainable are going to be like brands that didn't embrace the internet during the .com revolution. And I think it's continuing to track there. And so we're excited to talk with you today about how we're seeing that play out and how that's also affecting current areas of legislation that are coming up on both sides of the pond.
Well, all sounds great. Thank you, guys. Before we go ahead with the questions that I have for you, I also wanted to let the audience know that you have the opportunity to ask questions. Just go to the questions tab on the right, and if you want to say hi, just on the chat, we're going to save the last 10 minutes of this discussion for your questions, so feel free to pop in. The first question that I have, guys, we've been talking about the report that you just co-authored, that you published, I think it was in March this year. Mm-hmm. It's called the Sustainability and Consumerism, U.S. Consumer Behaviors and Preferences. One of the insights that I found very interesting was about the use of two particular words. One was recycled and one was green. So apparently recycled is the word most likely to influence consumers, particularly for boomers, and that you got the Gen X and then Gen Z with 52%. But the word that has a greater impact for millennials and Gen Z is green. I found that very interesting to see how those resonate differently with different generations. What else can you both share with us today about the insights that you got from your report? And also would be interested in understanding what kind of change have you seen post-pandemic? Rochelle, do you want to get started?
Yeah, thank you for that. So the research was focused on the US adult market. And as you rightly say, we published this in March this year. And it was really quite interesting because we were trying to understand consumer sentiment around environmental issues. How active is the US market in thinking about sustainability? And we found that about 94% of US adults thought it was really important to live a more sustainable lifestyle. And many of those, about half of them, thinking that was because it was healthier for their families to do so. But interestingly, and I think this is going to lead into a lot of the conversation today, about 43% said that they wish there was more information about how to do this. I'll go into a lot more later, but Jason, do you want to pick up on any of the other data that's in that report?
Yeah, I think one thing, from our standpoint in particular, is I think there is so much conversation around millennials and Gen Z, right? That's who you continually hear about. You hear about, youth climate activists and everybody else, which is all great. But I think there hasn't, at least that I've seen, Gen X and baby boomers aren't the sort of like hot generations or hot demos to go after for, I think, a lot of brands as they're looking for younger consumers. But at the same time, I think it's really important to understand that these are still behaviors that, these generations, myself included, are put a priority on and put an interest on. And I think in a lot of areas and times maybe have even a little bit more disposable income so that they can focus in these areas. Now, granted, we've also seen things that consumers are willing to pay more for things that are sustainable, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that they necessarily always need to cost more. And I think that's the goal that we're all really trying to see, right? Is so that, even in past research, we've seen for the younger generations, that sustainability ranks fourth as far as their purchase decision and hierarchy. So it's product efficacy and then price, which isn't really a surprise, and then accessibility, how easily they can purchase it, and then comes sustainability. So I think, those sorts of areas we always want to make sure that we're keeping in mind, but still making that sustainable piece as accessible as possible.
I think there's some interesting differences between the different generations as well, because you're absolutely right to mention sort of the climate strikes, Fridays for the Future, et cetera, among the younger generations, the Gen Z. But there's very much an ethic around the environment there, but also social issues are really, really important for that generation. So mental health, marginalization of people, the whole Black Lives Matter movement was really being pushed by that younger generation who really see equality and fairness as something that is absolutely fundamental to who they are and actually to the brands that they want to buy from. And so while they might not be able to afford products that are the best in terms of sustainability, and that's a whole issue that I think they really struggle with as well. As part of this prepare for this conversation, I spoke to quite a few people in that generation. That's not me, sadly, but I spoke to a lot of them who say that they have all of this anxiety because they want to purchase good things. They know how to purchase good things, but the price of a lot of the things that they want to buy is just that little bit too much beyond the money that they're earning or their pocket money, etc. So I think, while these issues around environmental sustainability are absolutely integral, it is also the social elements that where this younger generation is really interested in.
Yep, absolutely. And I would just add on to that, Laura, you had asked what we've seen, post-pandemic, and I think, just an area that really sort of underscores that businesses are starting to pay attention more is just the huge uptick that we've seen in companies applying to become certified B Corps. There's now, last I heard is over a 1-year wait list in the US. And I know that there's just more and more attention being paid on it because B Corp has been great through the whole pandemic about really leading with, not only sustainability in terms of environment, but really, creating thought leadership to be, anti-racist leaders in your companies, focusing on social issues. And then there have been a number of stats about just how much better B Corps have really come out on the other end of the pandemic, both with employee retention, both in business and everything else. But so I think just to go back to that point, that you are seeing, companies looking at like, what can we do to really make sure that we are being authentic and addressing, these social issues, these environmental issues. And I think, and this isn't to tout B Corp too much, even though Rochelle, you and I both work for and have companies that are. But I think it's a pretty solid qualifier that your company is doing the right thing. And so I think that's one area that we've seen with this with the summer of 2020 is really companies looking at what can we really do to not only address these issues internally and make sure our own house is in order, but to make sure that we have that certification that I think does really hold a high standard with consumers, especially as they learn more and more about it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I think that the pandemic has been instrumental in adding to the persistent fears that people had, both personal and societal, fear of climate change, fear of job insecurity, fear of getting sick, contracting COVID, and then also this sort of recognition that there are these sort of foundational problems in society around healthcare and problems with education or poverty that need to be fixed. And, there's a public affairs company called Edelman, which every year publishes something called a trust barometer. The trust barometer of 2021 shows that, for years and years and years over the last few, we've seen this huge decrease in the trust in institutions like government and the media. And people are turning to companies and they're expecting companies to fill that void that they used to get from these other institutions. And because of that, people are turning to these companies now to pay far more attention to a sense of purpose, and that businesses are having to step up and the people are requiring companies to take stands on things in a way that companies had never had to get engaged in conversations around policies and politics and, say the Black Lives Matter movement or environmental issues. And this is a new way of being judged by the consumers. And I think it's really interesting to see how the whole pandemic has really exacerbated some of these trends in a way that perhaps if we not had the pandemic, we wouldn't see such urgency towards change that we do now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you guys for sharing. So we're seeing two elements. One is the pandemic. The other one is the difference in between generations and what they really care the most about, right? We talked about Gen Z compared to other generations, social versus environmental sustainability. A lot of your research was based in the United States, but Rochelle, you're based in the UK, you're in London right now. So I'm just wondering, what can you guys share about the difference in terms of consumers when we talk about sustainability between the US and Europe, and if you want to say the UK as well?
I think generally Europe is ahead of the UK and also then ahead of the US in terms of its sustainability. And a lot of that comes from sort of the post-war socialism of a lot of the countries in Europe and the social protections and the social nets that have been in place. And also the fact that, from an environmental perspective, people live in so much closer proximity to one another. And so if there is pollution, it's felt by more people in a condensed space of geography. So I think that's one thing. But I think from a UK perspective, in terms of numbers, we are seeing people saying that they are taking more steps than they did before to be healthy. I think in countries where there is a greater disparity between rich and poor and more inequality, there is a recognition that poverty is a real central issue. And we see that in the UK and Greece and some of the other countries where there is a far greater disparity in inequality between the two. Whereas in other countries, we see far more around environmental concerns that are playing a role because their social needs are largely cared for. Countries like Sweden and some of the other Scandic countries, there are great social welfare programs already in place. And so their main concern is around the environment. I think we're seeing, so there's a figure that I saw recently that 70% of people in the UK want their money to go towards making positive differences to people on the planet. And I think that's really interesting because then you get into questions around what people say versus what they actually do and where the differences are between just because people are saying something doesn't mean that they're going to do what they say. And do you dismiss that outright or do you actually try and engage with it? So again, some stats on that I saw from Kantar, which is a research company that looks at branding and advertising in particular. 65% of Europeans said that they try to buy environmentally friendly packaging, but only a separate question, 29% say that they regularly avoid plastic packaging. 42% say that they have stopped buying products or services that have a negative impact on society or the environment, but 44% say that they will buy something without checking that it's been used, for example, with animal testing. And so you could dismiss this and say, people say one thing and they actually do another. But if you look at what are those reasons why they might be saying one thing and doing another, and what are the trends behind saying something and doing something? So I think it shouldn't, this say-do gap shouldn't be disregarded. And I think even saying it is important because it's showing the direction of movement. Because if you look at the data, so 65% of people say that they're trying to buy environmentally friendly packaging now in 2021. Well, just a few years ago, that was only 56%. So the movement in the direction is upwards, that people are looking for these things. And why they're not? Well, there are all sorts of barriers in place because if I go into the supermarket, there's plastic on all the fruits and vegetables. I have no choice unless I want to go down to the market or get a fruit and vegetable delivery to my door. people have busy lives, and it's not always possible to check the products on your shelves when you've got a family, or when you've just got jobs and other things going on in your life. And also the cost of some things are just really quite difficult. And so even if you want to do something, the cost barrier to doing something is for some people prohibitive to changing their behaviors. So I think there's some really interesting data in the European market, and I think we are slightly ahead of certainly of the US in a lot of actual behaviors, the move towards veganism, the move towards a lot of some of the green legislations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like just on this point, I think that one of the other elements that we talked about when we first chatted was how consumer sentiment is actually correlated to green legislation. We've just seen in the UK, I think it was at the end of September, the release by the CMA of the Green Claims Code. So brands have 3 months of time to get their houses in order and make sure that every single sustainability claim that they make is verifiable and credible. So this is what it's happening in the UK. Soon enough, we've seen anti-waste laws in France. So soon enough, probably this type of green claims code announcements will be made in other countries as well. I'm curious about the US. If we have the strong movement in Europe, what's happening over there, Jason?
Sure. So I think, I think to Rochelle's point, the US is definitely lagging behind in some areas. I think we are starting to see more, I think, with the current administration, obviously the talk of climate is continually in the news source. So I think that's just continually sort of tapping into, to people's mindsets. You're hearing about it, you're seeing it far more often on TV, those sorts of areas. I think people understand that, that climate change it's not something that's far away. It's at our door. It's something that we're experiencing firsthand on a regular basis now, unfortunately. I think some things that we are starting to see is, we've recently have had a couple of states pass EPR programs. So that's the extended producer responsibility, for those that aren't familiar, really meaning that if you produce something, you're responsible for taking it back and what happens with that. That's something that's much more prevalent over in Europe that we haven't seen in the US yet, like I said, until recently. So I think there's a lot more opportunity for that to happen. I think it's only a matter of time before we see a state like New York or California adopt that as policy. And then as soon as, once a state like California, who, if they themselves were a country, I believe they're like one of the 4th largest economies in the world, right? So above Germany or a few other nations. That makes a real impact on the way that companies have to produce things and what they have to address, because it's a huge market. So I think it's only a matter of time before we have state by state that starts to just become almost federal, even if it isn't passed at the federal level. I'm sure for anyone that is in the US, we've seen a lot of talk about legislation about the current climate bill that's trying to get pushed through. That seems to be, getting stripped down a little bit, unfortunately now, but really, addressing both people and planet with a lot of those the programs that are in there. But I think when we come back to consumers, to that point, I think they're from speaking with some of our clients that are headquartered in Europe, but have strong presences here in the US. I think one thing that we see from the consumer standpoint is over in Europe, I think there's just more of an expectation that things are being created the right way and being done the right way. And that's just not the case here. I think the expectation of American consumers is that things are just being made, whether for product efficacy or performance, or, in more cases, really just focus on like, hey, we're creating good product, but maybe profit is more of at the center, or maybe it's not that quite cynical. But the point being is that US audiences need to be told and educated what it is that your product is doing. It shouldn't be something that's given or taken for granted. And so I think, when you are doing really good work as a brand, that it's more important than ever to really message that over here, because it's something that consumers really sort of need to be told and have some education around, like, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's why it's better. And I think especially, because to go back to slightly to that cynicism and a lot of the greenwashing that we've seen from brands over the years, I think it's just more important than ever that brands are really transparent in their marketing activities as well. And so if it's saying, hey, this is what we're doing now. It's not perfect. There's no silver bullet for any of this stuff, but this is our first step. This is a way that we're doing something better and how we're going to continue to move forward and do better moving on. And I think just continue being very open and upfront with what they're doing, with what a brand is doing when they're doing that messaging and marketing. So those are the things where you really start to see, more of that brand affinity. If you look at a brand like Patagonia, or there's a number of others, but I think they always sort of stand out as the gold standard, as they say, like, here's what we're doing. It's as good as we can do right now. We're going to continually look at what we can do to do better, but know that this is first and foremost always the priority and is in line with the efficacy of the product, right? We want to make something that performs exactly as you need it to be and do it in the best way possible. Going back to Rochelle's point about, cost and how attainable some of these products are for the younger generations, I think we see the same thing here. I think we're also seeing, Laura, you mentioned ThreadUp as well. I think we're really seeing companies like that take off, and more brands really adopt a resale model, because one, it's getting continued use out of something, it's keeping something out of the waste stream, and also recognizing there's a lot of life to these products, but from a business standpoint, there is a great opportunity there to get, almost another round of revenue off something that you've already sold, right? So you've just seen REI institute a really sizable trade-in program. So much, again, back to Patagonia with their War Anywhere program, where, trade in your gently used gear, we'll give you credit, and then others can purchase it in a resale model. So that's something that, we've been seeing from a brand standpoint. You've been seeing emergences with brands like ThreadUp or The Real, and then just an increase, talking with Gen Z consumers in the past, sort of in past with some of our other insights reports, really more looking at that resale and, whether it's thrift stores, vintage stores, those sorts of things, or interacting with brands that do have resale components. So I think that's one way that, that brands can make more of an effort towards sustainability. I think, as you said, drive another revenue stream off of there, and then additionally market that. It's a way to get people in to say, like, hey, I want to trade in my stuff. I'm going to get credit to purchase something new. But then there's also this other revenue model that's out there. So I think it's really just a win all the way across. So benefiting consumers that maybe don't want to spend as much, getting more life out of something, and then creating more of that brand affinity with people that are already interacting with your company as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially from a marketing perspective, when you talk about transparency and authenticity and the way that you communicate to your audience. Because I think that the moment that you become honest about, the point that you're at, the more you create a connection with the people, with your audience. One of the things that I wanted to ask both of you, you just gave a great examples, Jason, and we can name even more fashion brands, right, that are engaging in sustainability practices. I'm just curious about those brands that have not made a move yet. Do you think that these brands are kind of underestimated outside of the climate emergency, of course, that we're living in these days, but that they're really underestimating the power of consumers and how consumers can, one, shift the narratives, and to push for legislation? Do you think that they're just underestimating this whole context?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, more than ever, it's in the past, 3 to 5 years, I think consumers realize that they have a lot more levers of power. And I think, just this past summer and everything, the shift that we've spoken about is there more than ever. So there's a lever that they have with voting with their wallet, and what those purchase decisions that they're making. And I think, Laura, to that point about are they underestimating, I don't think you need to look any farther than a company like Forever 21, where years ago they had massive growth, and just a year or two ago, sorry, everything's a little bit of blur with the last year, had filed for bankruptcy. And I think a lot of that is pushback against the fast fashion movement, whereas other companies that that had been a part of that movement, like an H&M, for example, and had been called out for greenwashing in the past for some of their lines, they've made some really strong commitments and realize that they can really make change at scale, and actually are doing a lot of really good work in that space. I think, just to go back to that point as well, because there has been so much greenwashing, I think that's that much more key for companies to be transparent in their marketing, and really also educational, because a lot of this stuff is really complicated, and it's gone beyond just saying, that something's eco-friendly, or even though, we've seen green resonate, well, what does green really mean? And having, that explanation and that education is part of that marketing message. So it's not just saying like, hey, we're doing the right thing, but here's what we're doing, and here's why we're doing it, and here's the impact that it's having. I think those tenets really need to be key in any marketing around sustainability. And I think, I don't think it's going to be just marketing around sustainability. It's just going to become what marketing is like as far as your product, now and moving forward. And just back to that original question, I really, as I said before, I think it's going to be exactly like brands who didn't embrace the internet during the .com era, right? So I think brands that don't in the next couple of years, they're going to be playing catch up, and they're going to do it fast, and they're going to do it expensive, or they're just going to go under. Because I think you're seeing more and more brands that are doing the right thing coming up, or the brands that do realize the importance of it. They're going to be prepared when it gets to this really critical point that I don't think is very far away. And I'll just add to that. I just saw an article yesterday. I think it was I was in Glossy, but it was about how Fendi is doing. They're doing a new collaboration, but really not addressing sustainability. And they're saying like, here's this power fashion house that's been around for so long and has always really been at the pinnacle, the prestige level of luxury. And the question was, well, if they're not doing about sustainability, is this even something that's going to resonate with consumers now? Is it going to be impactful? Are they still going to continue to struggle? Because of that lack of consideration for it. And I think you're seeing other brands that are taking it seriously that are going to be much more equipped in the coming years, because I think that shift to consumer power is just going to continue to grow. And then at that same point, what we really need to do, and I think what one of the organizations that we partner with is really focused on doing, is taking that passion and advocacy, or that passion that consumers have for these sorts of areas, and turning that into advocacy. And I think that's when it really gets into the legislative end for things, where we start to see voting in representatives that embrace those values and understand that these issues are here and are going to have solutions to solve it.
I don't think you mentioned sort of looking at these things outside of the climate emergency, and I don't think at the moment we can. And particularly, right, we're on the eve of the COP26 climate discussions in Glasgow in Scotland, and they start on Monday next week. And I think there is a lot of what's happening is happening as a result of legislation as well as consumer sentiment. And we're moving away from companies that are being allowed to say, oh yeah, we're doing better, to actually, are you doing enough? And I think there's this movement of doing better to doing enough that actually means that the legislation is coming in to catch up on the one hand. So in Europe, we have the European Green Deal, which is going to affect the fashion world, because it's all about the right to repair and the right to have products that aren't just going to last for 1 or 2 washes and then have to be thrown away and put into landfill. This is about keeping things in a circular movement, but also keeping things lasting for a long time and allowing people not to have to just throw things away. So I think that's the thing on the one hand, where climate is absolutely integral to a lot of what is actually happening at the moment. Consumer trust and consumer push for shifting those narratives, I think, is absolutely there. And, consumers around the world believe that they have the power now, and they've seen that they have the power when they work together to change behavior. And I mean, even individuals, you look at someone like Billie Eilish, at the Met Ball the other day, she spoke to Oscar de la Renta and said, I will wear your dress on the condition that you won't use fur in your products anymore. And apparently that deal, whether it's actually going to happen in the long run, I don't know. But, to be able to have that push, but we're seeing it in other places as well. So from sort of the carrot perspective, you see apps or sort of stamp marks like the butterfly mark from Positive Luxury. You have to go through a system And then you get a mark and you can put that on your product and say that actually you are adhering to all of these great standards. Similarly, you know, with B Corp and Chloe, you know, the fashion brand just recently, last week, I believe, became a B Corp, certified B Corp. So, you know, we welcome them to the club and welcome certainly more fashion brands there as well. But apps like, I know I use one called Good On You. I've got it on my phone. It's also a website. I get regular updates and I can look at brands and how they perform on a number of different issues. And so I can make a decision on the basis of whether I want to shop or not with those certain brands. And while, you know, people say, I think the figures about, you know, nearly 70% of British consumers say that they want to use an app like that. Now, whether they do or not, again, it's that say-do gap. But again, if you look at, you know, years ago when they were asked that same question, that percentage was in the 50s. So the momentum is there that more and more people are trying to find out information about what is happening in the products that they're trying to buy. I think, so, you know, we're seeing it in travel as well. So booking.com has eco-sustainability rankings. There is a Spanish chambermaids employees union where they've just created a website, so you can go on a Spanish website and you can find whether the hotels pay their staff properly. You know, so more and more of these things are happening because they're in demand. And then I think there's the stick approach where you're seeing sites like Diet Product really calling out bad practice. And a colleague of mine pointed me in the direction of something that was on TikTok that then got picked up on Diet Prada about Coach bags that were slashed when they get thrown in the bin at the retail. And, you know, something like that went absolutely viral. And, you know, the bad publicity for a company like Coach, who has all over its website, yes, you have the right to repair and that, you know, we take circularity and sustainability responsibly. And then you have this, you know, there's, you know, this disconnect between what is happening on the ground that I would imagine, you know, there are some serious changes in policy that are going on in that company right now. And you know, we're seeing other things like in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and in The Hague, there are now bans on tobacco advertising in public spaces. And that's been the case in many places. But in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, they're also introducing bans on any fossil fuel-based transportation or any fossil fuel-based service advertising in public spaces. So what happens when the fast fashion world gets to a stage where its carbon emissions are so great, its waste levels are so great? Will, you know, destinations that are really forward thinking or places that are really forward thinking start to ban and see, you know, the fast fashion world as a sin industry as well, and to start taking them on in that respect? And I think one thing that's really key is that brands can't hide anymore. So the example of Coach that I gave, and there's this word for it, which is that brands are these glass boxes. And so whereas in the past, everything, you know, had walls and windows and it was so difficult to see within a company, people have mobile phones now, staff talk, there are notice boards, there are Facebook sites, there are Instagram and TikTok, and all of these places where bad practice used to be hidden away because none of this existed is all aired in the open now. And so we see everything, and it's far more difficult for companies to hide in a way that they perhaps could before. And you know, there is this sense that brands are expected to be leading consumers, and consumers want brands to lead them in this direction to make sure that they are you know, they are buying right and changing. Consumers don't want to have to make those decisions themselves. It's too difficult. It's too confusing. They don't know what they're doing. So the brands have to be there to do it for them.
Right,
Yeah,
Rochelle,
yeah.
I have a couple things really quickly to just add to that. I think it's spot on. I think particularly to that last point, you know, brands are the arbiter of, you know, really what's cool and what's in. I remember speaking to somebody who worked at a company that made lipstick tubes previously, and we were asking them about, you know, what are they looking at as far as recycled materials, you know, bio-based materials, those sorts of things. And they're like, well, a lot of the brands don't want to use recycled plastic for black lipstick tubes because you can't get a true black, right, if it's recycled. But at the same time, the brand is the one who can say like, hey, yeah, it's not a true black and this is why. And, you know, this is actually what the new cool thing is. It's not a pure black. because we are using recycled and we are taking a better approach to this. And, we're going to do something that immediately when you see it, it's not going to be what you used to see, but it's because we're not doing business the way that we used to do it. And so we are really looking to minimize that impact. So it's completely up to the brand. The brand doesn't have to say like, oh, the consumers are only going to want something that's a pure black lipstick tube. It's on to the brands to say like, no, this is what's cool. And this is what's, really the great thing. And, that comes into marketing and product and everything else as well. To that other point too, I think it's just like content has been democratized by the internet. This sort of exposure to what companies are doing has also been really opened up, to your point, Rochelle, and I think it's great. We're seeing that more and more. The last thing I would just add is that I thought is really cool to your point about travel is Google actually just added a new feature now that you can search for eco-friendly travel in hotels and resorts to stay. So I think, talking about this carrot approach, I think it's a great way to just, the more that you expose that information to consumers, the more they're going to take that into account, when they're looking to make those decisions. And it's like, if I can stay here where it's just a regular hotel, or I can stay here that I know that, pays their staff well, they're, maybe running a circular system inside of the hotel or whatever it is. I think you're just going to continue to see consumers shift towards that. And I think we are seeing more of a growth in the, ecotourism and, luxury travel industry in that sense of taking that into consideration a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you both. I just see like one of the questions popping up. Although consumers are more conscious, I don't see mass consumerism slowing down at all in the US or in much of Europe for that matter. Have you seen any trends regarding consumerism and people deciding to just slow down their buying habit?
I think I can speak to the US a little bit just in the way that, you are seeing more brands do limited runs, drop collections, because at one time, it's sort of like the Supreme model of, doing a drop collection. It's because it's limited, it has more engagement as far as people really wanting to pick it up. Granted, Supreme is they have the sort of fan brand, but, we are seeing more in the sense of, of limited runs. There's been more of a focus on not doing clothing lines so seasonally, so there is more of a longevity towards it, and then also looking to that same increase in longevity of the product itself. I don't have a specific trend or research study to point to, but I know it's something that I've been reading more and more about. Especially Vogue Business has been speaking, Business Fashion is speaking more and more about it, and so we are seeing brands take that approach a bit more. And I think that's also a trend that's going to continue to grow in that space. I would also speak to refillables. I know that's not necessarily dropping consumerism, but looking at, reducing the amount of stuff that's actually made.
I think, changes are not going to happen because a few consumers decide that they want to behave differently. Change happens because of a system. And so, yes, you need behavior change and you need the shifts in social norms. So what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, but you also need the innovation in tech, and you need strong institutions, and you need leadership from people that are willing to put their heads above the parapet and stand up. And you also need regulations and incentives. And we're certainly seeing, certainly in Europe anyway, the regulations and incentives for reducing waste, for creating much more circularity, for thinking about the buyback programs, etc. These are our rules and regulations. And even, say, Jason's already mentioned, but in California around what can and can't be called recycled anymore. This whole greenwashing element. There are a lot of crackdowns. You mentioned it, Laura, as well, around the green marketing codes. There's a lot of crackdown that's happening that all forms part of a system which moves people along. It's not going to happen from any one place. I for a second don't believe that it's going to be necessarily led by consumers. They're going to be part of the change that happens.
Yeah. So we only got a couple of minutes, but I would love to give the opportunity to for another question, which I think is very interesting. Do you think brands need to refine their measurements of success away from just pure growth to address responsible consumerism? And if so, what should they be looking for? I know it requires probably much longer than a couple of minutes, but
I mean, I think it's, one of the things that, I'll speak from a firsthand account, one of the things that that was really, since we got our B Corp certification a year and a half ago, It's just really helped us to look at, as we're doing projections for revenue growth and what that's going to be, we're really taking into account all the other areas that we can affect as well. So what are the areas that we can affect as far as our impact and how that's going to grow, how we're treating our employees, that's going to grow. And I don't think that's a model that is really endemic or specific to us or anything that we're doing. And I think that's the first step that brands can look at, is really looking at this triple bottom line approach. So it really is, planet, people, and profit all weighted equally. And then I think that gets communicated again back to transparency, right? And I think we've seen that in, over the past year, brands that were, sort of really touting how sustainably they were and how good they were for the environment. Well, it turns out that they didn't have the best practices when it came to people, or they had, sort of like racist cultures going on inside of their stores. And that's not something that can be acceptable in the future. So I think as you're seeing companies, publish their sustainability reports, I think that's one good area. I think it's also a way that you can bring it front and center to the marketing. I know one of the brands that we work with, they've, been doing just really great work for a really long time. And they've finally, they're touting it on their homepage now. So I think, it's, making those efforts internally, but then also making sure that that's getting communicated to the consumers. And it really has to be, again, looking at this triple bottom line for everything. You really need to, it's not just about like, what's our revenue going to be? It's really going to be looking at, what's the positive impact that we're making all the way through. And then back to something that, people have probably heard, but it's coming up more and more, is really looking at it from a stakeholder standpoint and not just a shareholder perspective, right? So when we talk about stakeholders, we're talking about the employees, the community around us, the environment. Shareholders get factored in there, but they're 1/5 of the pie, along with everything else being weighted equally. And so I think that approach just really is key to what we're doing. And what's great is we've seen, one of our larger, global insurance company clients, they speak about, valuing their stakeholders and not just their shareholders, and really the movement that they're making to push that forward, the programs that they're doing through their foundation. And then also not only putting out their sustainability report, but communicating that throughout and really taking all that great work and breaking it into digestible bits of information so that it can resonate with consumers. And I think that's the approach that really brands have to take. So doing that work and then getting it out there in a way that isn't going to be overwhelming, but it's going to be simple and consistent all the way through.
I think that's absolutely excellent. Yeah.
Sorry, Rochelle, go ahead.
No. I was just going to absolutely agree with everything that with Jason said. This is about corporate relevance. It's about companies proving that they have a purpose in the world. Otherwise, why are they just creating business if it's just actually not building in the externalities of what they're doing? And actually, it's not. By not building in the externalities, we're not actually measuring what actually they're doing in terms of contribution.
Yeah. I think that what's really coming out of the past 45 minutes is a lot of, good communication, clear marketing, authenticity, transparency, and purpose. So if there's probably kind of a mix of ingredients that the brands should be looking at, they would be probably part of this list as well, in terms of how Rochelle, you said something about we went from doing better to are we doing better to are we doing enough? So I think that the question is really, how can we actually get even better every day, right? So I think that that's exactly where we are in terms of mixing these different elements. We ran out of time, but I really wanted to thank you guys for this great conversation. The recording will be available just tomorrow or at the beginning of next week. And for any of the questions that you guys have, please feel free to send us an email. And again, this was amazing. So thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your perspective from both the US and Europe, and to help us look better at what the consumer sentiment is and green legislation is in the two different parts of the world.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. Honored to be a part of, what is a few great companies here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
All right.
Have a good
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye.